So my understanding is that the title for tonight was or is how and why, or why and how to connect to God. And I'd love to discuss that topic. I think it's the topic, maybe the most important topic of religion, and it's kind of the essence of religion. Anyone know what the word religion actually means, by the way? Like in Latin, its original meaning?
To connect.
To connect, yeah, very good. So what are we connecting to? So it's interesting, right? Like a synagogue, a shul, in Hebrew is called, anyone know? Two words, a Beit Knesset, which means a house of gathering. So essentially a house of connecting, right? Like religion's to connect. It's a house of connecting. So who's connecting to who? Who's gathering? Who's connecting? So there's actually two interpretations to what it's referring to. One interpretation is that it's referring to the gathering or the connecting of the Jewish people and God. And the other interpretation is that it's the gathering or the connecting of Jewish people to other Jewish people. And I actually think that those two interpretations maybe have a intentional ambiguity, because it's intentionally showing us that really those two different connections are really one and the same in some sense. And that there's this kind of fluid space between how we connect to God and connect to people, and connect to people connects us to God, and it all feeds off of itself. So religion really is about connection, which in my view is why religion is struggling so much right now. Because in our culture, in our world, relationships are struggling. That's what all the research seems to show. And it's what many of our personal experiences seem to show, is that people are having a hard time building deep, meaningful, and long-lasting, successful relationships. People think that conversation of why we struggle with relationships is one conversation, and then there's another conversation about the state of affairs of religious life. So people typically present these as two totally different topics. There's a topic of like how, the state of marriage in like Western culture, and why there's such a high rise of divorce and marital dissatisfaction, and romantic relationships are struggling. And there's kind of a cultural disintegration around relational well-being. There's a lot more loneliness, a lot more social isolation, and all that kind of stuff. And that's one conversation. And then there's a separate conversation, which is the state of affairs with religious life, and are people religious, and are people engaged in religion? And there seems to be a disintegration and a dissolving and an unraveling there too. But people typically present those things as two separate conversations. In my humble view, it's actually the same conversation. Because the point is that if we don't know how to do relationships, then we won't know how to do marriage, and we won't know how to do religion, because both of them are about a relationship. They're essentially about the same exact thing. Religion is about relationship. It's not about performance of certain acts. It's not about culture. It's not about certain foods. It's not about certain places. It's about all of those things, but it's only about all of those things when it's actually about the thing that underlies all of those things, which is connection and relationship. So if we culturally are not good at relationships, then it's no surprise that culturally we're not going to be good at religion, because religion is a relationship. And it's actually in some ways the forgotten part of religion, which is kind of almost oxymoronic. It's like we have religion, but we don't have a relationship with God. Well, okay, but then do you have religion? And what does it mean? You have a lot of religious folk out there, but I don't know. How do you decide if someone's religious or not? If they keep all the commandments, but they don't even know who the commander is. So then how religious are they? Religion means connection. The word in Hebrew for commandment, actually, by the way, is mitzvah. But in many of the different sources, they say there's actually another meaning to that word, which is connection. And under that reading, there's a beautiful teaching in Pirkei Avos that says, schar mitzvah mitzvah, the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. So if you read that word mitzvah as connection, then what does that phrase mean? The reward of mitzvah is mitzvah, meaning the reward of connection is connection. What's the purpose of connection? To be connected. That's what it is. There's no other need for explanation kind of beyond that. Okay, so that's just kind of my free association. That what's not even what I wrote down. I'm just going. But I'm curious if we kind of go backwards now. I'm curious if you think about the word God. if anyone's willing, I'd love to kind of go around, or maybe popcorn style, whatever it is. What comes to mind for you? If you say one word, the first word that comes to mind for you when you hear the word God. What's the first word that comes to mind? Yeah. Creator. Okay.
All-knowing.
All-knowing.
Powerful.
Powerful.
Infinite.
Infinite. What was that? Father. Okay, great. Was it? Love. Anyone else? Judgment. Okay. All true, I think. I think one of our challenges, these are all true. I think one of our challenges is that for many of us, we've kind of received a philosophical notion of God. Whether or not you studied philosophy or you're philosophically minded, God has kind of become influenced by the tradition of, let's call it ancient Greek philosophy, that has really taken kind of the Western culture, university world in a way that is both explicit and implicit. So even if you've never studied philosophy of religion or God in philosophical contexts, but we come to know God in a very Americanized philosophical way, which means that we think of God as a concept. And actually the most radical thing, I think, in my opinion, the most radical thing about Judaism is that in some way, on some level, we actually think that God is kind of like a person. The Torah describes God as being like a person. So, to be intellectually honest here and give you the full landscape, there are those in our tradition that say that when the Torah says that, it really doesn't mean that at all. We shouldn't take it to have any meaning. It's just a way of speaking as a figure of speech. But really, the philosophical notion of God as a being that's out there, way out there, not physically, of course, but figuratively speaking, way out there, conceptual being, that's really what God is. But that's not the mainstream of our tradition. The mainstream of our tradition is that when the Torah and Judaism and Jewish texts speak about God in a way that makes God sound like a person, it might not mean it literally in the way that I have a hand, God has a hand, or the way that I cry, God cries, or the way that I get angry, God gets angry, or the way that I feel pride or happiness, God feels pride or happiness, or anything like that. It might not mean it literally in the way that I feel it is the way that he feels it. But that what the text is describing as depicting God in a personal way is actually meant to be taken seriously. That God has chosen to make himself, so to speak, personal and personable, and has chosen to enter a relationship. And that in some way we're actually supposed to think that God has happiness similar to the happiness we feel. And God has sadness and tears and anger and jealousy and pride and excitement and regret and all these human emotions and human characteristics, that in some way God actually is like that too. And that is truly radical. Like that's wild. Philosophically speaking, it's deeply problematic. Deeply problematic. But what Judaism says is, okay, that can be problematic philosophically because you are using the confined apparatus of the human mind to try and comprehend something that is bigger and broader and different than the apparatus that the human mind can comprehend. So whatever you're thinking is a problem is not actually a problem because it's only a problem from your vantage point when you're looking through a certain lens and you can't see the whole picture and you can't see what's actually going on. But it's not actually a problem. And God has revealed himself in a way that is meant to show you that God is saying, I am here to have a personal relationship with. And you can actually experience my presence. It's not a remote concept. It's not something you believe in. It's actually something that you taste and experience. Now, how do you taste and experience it? How do you come to know God? How do you have a relationship with God? It's an important question. Curious if anyone has any thoughts. What would you say? Does anyone feel like they do have a relationship with God? How do you come to experience that? How have you found that? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How would you describe it, if anyone's comfortable sharing?
Push them. It's good for them.
Yeah? What's your name?
I'm Michael.
Okay.
I didn't realize it was possible to have a relationship with God, but then I kind of started asking for things in my prayers, and they started to happen. So
Well,
I guess the relationship's there, even whether I'm aware of it or not. But I can choose to kind of create the relationship, build it.
So you experience kind of a dialogue in with God, in which you speak to God, and He speaks back to you by actually answering.
Yeah.
And I always find it really amazing that anyone know the verb that's used to describe God's creation of the world? Like, what is the Torah? What does it say in the verse that to describe what did God do in order to make something happen? Bara. But what did He do? He spoke. Exactly. Like, it doesn't say He flexed or he snapped his fingers or waved a wand or something. It said He spoke. Vayomer Elokim, and God spoke. Why is that the verb that was chosen? So I've always thought, I don't know if this is true. I never saw this written anywhere, but I've always thought that it's because of what you're saying. Because God actually speaks to us through the world. There's teachings that talk about how if you see something in the world, something passes, but you're walking down the street and something passes before you. There was a reason you saw that. There's a reason why that passed before you. God was actually speaking to you through the event that you happen to have been witness to. So the things that happen around you are God communicating to you. So we actually, people often say, well, I speak to God, but He doesn't speak back to me. But He does. That's like what you're talking about. So there's a conversation, there's a dialogue that we can experience. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to complement his thoughts. Because in my case, sometimes when things happen that I wasn't expecting or is not something that is pleasant or whatever, I want to, or I need to feel that there is a reason for that, and that's God, because He knows better than me, it's good for me or whatever. So sometimes doesn't happen in what I asked for, but happening something different is what makes me feel like, okay, that's God's plan, and just don't crazy or like what's next or whatever.
So tell me if I'm capturing what you're saying correctly, that you have a kind of maybe almost intuition, a natural sense that the things that happen to you happen for a reason. And that's not and I want to say this clearly, and again, I'm speaking for you, but tell me if this is accurate to what you're saying. Maybe I'm building on it a little bit. It's not an intellectual proof or knowledge. It's a sense, it's an intuition that the things that happen to me have purpose, they have a reason. And when I intuit that, when I sense that, the feeling that I come to know is that there's a cause to what happens to me, which means that there's a causer, right? That if there's purpose to what's happening to me, there must be a being with intention and purpose that's orchestrating all those things that are happening. And my intuition of that being the reality that I experience is actually more powerful than some sort of like 2 + 2 = 4 proof for God. Because, well, maybe someone can come one day and say, but maybe 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, and whatever right? But what you're describing is there's just a natural, organic, almost physical intuition that what's happening to me has purpose, has reason. And that's coming into contact with a being that is orchestrating the world.
Yes, and if you don't have that, you are always concerned. What's next? What's going to happen?
Right.
If you don't believe there is a purpose.
Right.
So I think that's.
Yeah, amazing. Wow, powerful. Okay, and the reason I love this exercise so much, and I'd love to hear other people have other thoughts, is because notice how. What's your name?
Vito.
Okay, so the two.
Victor without.
Okay. So the two responses that you guys gave were very different than each other. You both came into contact, in a sense, you both came to a experiential knowledge, that, not intellectual knowledge, but an experiential knowledge, that there exists this being beyond the world. You came to it in very different ways. And I think that's part of what's so amazing, is there's different ways to come into contact with this being. So yeah, curious of others.
Yeah, I struggle and have questions with the intuition feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but I've tried his Bodidus.
Yeah.
That's the word.
You didn't butcher it at all, actually. That was pretty perfect.
First time. But when you have an intuition or a feeling doing that, I have no way of knowing how to tell if it's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You could have a feeling that turns out to be the wrong feeling or to be not true. And I don't know how to distinguish between whether that intuition is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what you mean by you can have a feeling that's not true?
I mean, there's lots of false prophets, right, in history.
Yeah, but in your experience.
Well, I guess I don't know if it's not true. I don't know if any of them are true or not. Sometimes you have a feeling you can feel a message, but you don't know if that's really a message or if you're making that up. Or what.
Sure, but I'm saying, do you have an experience from your personal experience of a situation that it was false? Not that you're not sure, but that it was actually false?
No, nothing that I know is false. No.
Okay, so then I don't think you have to be too concerned about it.
Is that it?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, what do I know? But I don't know. It doesn't sound like you have too much precedent to be concerned about. Maybe. Right? I mean, if you were to tell me, I've had all these life experiences where I felt something and I was certain of it, or I was pretty close to certain, and then it turned out to be totally not true or wrong or whatever it was. And now I'm experiencing this thing and I don't know how to know if it's true or not. Okay, I hear it. It's a very important thing to pause and consider. But if you're telling me you've never even had that experience, then I don't know. Maybe we don't have to be so concerned about it.
Good point.
Maybe. But to maybe add on to that a little bit, to give a little bit more substance to your question. Because I hear what you're asking. I'm not trying to, put it down. I just think it's an important point, because I think sometimes that can be an overrated concern for people sometimes, because I think our intuition usually has something going on. There was one of the most important Jewish writers was someone named Yehuda Halevi, and he wrote a book called The Kuzari. Very highly recommend it. There's a lot of there's some very nice English translations. What he writes is the following regarding this point. He says that just as God gave us in our brain a capacity, almost so to speak, an apparatus that gives us the capacity to perceive the physical world around us. So God created me in a way that I perceive that you exist in a physical space, in a physical world, that this table, this tablecloth, etc. exists. This thing is outside of me, and I can perceive that it exists. That's how we're built. So what he writes is that parallel to that, God gave us an apparatus that is able to naturally, just like I naturally perceive the physical world around me, that I have built into me the capacity to perceive the spiritual world around me, to perceive that God exists. It's built into us. Parallel to my ability to perceive the brick wall right there behind you, I have the ability to perceive a spiritual being that is beyond and inside of this world that we call God. But then he asks your question. And he says, okay, but if that's just based on perception and intuition, then can't anybody just kind of feel like they're perceiving something and it might not be true? So he says there's two ways to create the checks and balances for that intuition. Because what he's doing is he's coming to kind of negate what started to become a distortion of Judaism, of people who started to take Greek philosophy and try and fit Judaism into Greek philosophy. And they tried to focus on proving God from a philosophical, intellectual place. Like I once had a professor in college. I was a very passionate student of philosophy. My path has taken many strange and interesting turns. But at some point in my life, I was very interested in philosophy. And I once had a...
local college reference. Some of them might connect.
What do you say?
You were at University of Chicago?
I was almost at University of Chicago. I was toying with it, and then I didn't end up going. I actually ended up getting rejected, but then I was whatever, whole story. Anyway, but thank God it worked out very well that they did not accept me. But I did a master's in philosophy, and we had a professor who had a proof that he had come up with for the existence of God. I don't remember exactly how many, but I believe it was like 167 step proof. It was all like, not X, then, right? It was like this long sequence of like 100-something steps, that the conclusion of which is that God exists. Okay, right? So now what does that mean? So I can prove that he exists in that way. So first of all, someone's going to clearly come and be able to show or claim that, well, maybe this proof is not ironclad. And now the existence of God is contingent on this 167-step mathematical proof that God exists. It's hard to see how that turns into a relationship with God. What this text that I'm referencing now, the Kuzari, is coming to say is we don't want religion to turn into that, because we don't need that. Because as a more recent writer, Rabbi Soloveitchik, wrote, does the groom holding the bride in his arms need a philosopher to come give him a proof that she exists? When you feel God in your presence, when you feel held by God, you don't need the 167 proof step. So what he writes, though, is that, but we have to be careful because of your question. What if I intuit something that might be completely subjective and a figment of my imagination? So what he says is the fundamental driver of my knowledge of God is my experience, is that I taste God, that I behold God, right? But we need checks and balances. So what he says is that there's two checks and balances. The first is to make a distinction between that which is irrational and that which is irrational. Irrational means that it goes against logic. Irrational means that it's not logically proven, but it's not logically problematic. So he says, if your intuition brings you to the belief or the experience of something that is irrational, you have to reconsider. But if it's that it brings you to the conclusion of something that is irrational, then you're okay. That's number one. Number two, he says, is that you want to test your conclusion with other people. If you are the only person in the world who perceives this, then your intuition might be screaming at you, but you also still might want to wonder, why is nobody else experiencing this feeling? Right. But the difference in the Jewish prophets and other prophets, and this is what he writes, is that the prophecy, or the not every prophecy, but the prophecies that form the fundamental tenets of our religion were prophecies that were experienced in mass. And that's actually exactly the point. The prophecies that are the fundamental tenets of other religions were individual prophecies that nobody else experienced besides the one person claiming to experience them. But the fundamental prophecies that made Judaism into the beliefs that it is were prophecies that were experienced in mass, in public, more than one person. That we can corroborate what we experienced, and we can test it out with other people. But again, the point being that the fundamental driver of why I believe what I believe is not because I can prove it. It's because I taste it, because I know it, because I've been in the experience. So yes, I can give an 167-step proof to God, but if you've never heard music, if you've never listened to music, somebody can try and scientifically explain to you what music is, but you have no idea what music is. And the same thing with being at a thrilling sports game, or seeing a work of art, or seeing a gorgeous view or landscape or anything like that. We can describe it scientifically. We can describe it on on a physics level, whatever it is, but if you haven't actually experienced it, you don't know what it is. There's a great story that my personal Rebbe, my rabbi, my teacher loves to tell. His name is Rabbi Moshe Weinberger. He loves to tell this story of, steer me in any direction, please, that you want, because I'm just going. This is not really happening, this little note that I made. So please, if there's something in a different direction,
Really well.
just let me know, okay? Thank you. So he loves to tell this story. I heard him tell it a few years ago that there was I don't think it's a true story, but it's a beautiful story. It's true in the sense that it's true. You know what I mean? Not necessarily that it happened, but it's true. There was a poetry recital somewhere in London, and there were all these young scholars of poetry who would come up and read a poem, and you would kind of advance in levels of, if you read it in the most majestic and poetic and the way that you captured the inflection of each word and where you paused and how long you paused for and how you were able to recite the poem, if it conveyed the full experience and the emotion and nuance and subtlety of the poem. And these contestants are advancing one level at a time, and finally they get up to the final round. And the final round, what they're given is actually a poem from Psalms, from our tradition, from Tehillim. And I believe it was the 23rd chapter, which begins, Mizmor LeDavid, Hashem ro'i lo echsar, a song to David, God is my shepherd, I shall not fear. And it goes on to describe King David's relationship with God as his shepherd. And this young man gets up and he reads the poem, and it's incredible how he reads it. You could hear a pin drop. The whole auditorium is completely silent, and when he finishes, everyone stands up and gives a standing ovation, and he's the clear winner. The other guy, no chance. It was unbelievable, breathtaking. And everyone's clapping, standing ovation. And suddenly, an old man, an old European Jew, a little bent over, starts to walk up to the stage, and he says, that was beautiful. Would it be okay? Would you mind if I gave it a shot also? And he says, sure. He was respectful of the older man, and he lets him come up on stage, and the old man takes out the chapter, and he starts to read it in a very different kind of a way. And everybody falls silent again. But this time, by the time he finishes the poem, reciting this, God is my shepherd, I shall not fear, no one is clapping, no one's standing on their feet, but everyone is crying. And he finishes reading and he goes back down, and the young man who won the contest comes chasing after him, and he says, sir, take this trophy. You definitely deserve this more than I do. That was unbelievable. And the old man says, no, I want you to have it. And says, why when I finished was everybody clapping, and when you finished, everyone was crying? So the old man turned to me and he said, you recited the poem beautifully, but the difference between you and I is that I know the shepherd. That's what it means to be Jewish, to live a Jewish life. That's what it means to live a Jewish life. It's to know the shepherd, to not just be able to say the words. You could say it in the most amazing way, and people can clap, and you can do all the things, and all this stuff is important. You can keep Shabbos, and you can put on the tefillin, and you can open a siddur, a prayer book, and that stuff is important. But what Judaism is really about is knowing the shepherd. It's about knowing the shepherd, having that relationship, living with the shepherd. Now, what Judaism comes to tell us is that the shepherd told us that there are certain ways to get to know him. And that's what the mitzvot are. That's what keeping Shabbos is. That's what putting on the tefillin is. That's what opening the prayer book is. That God said, here's how you know me. Here is how you can come to really know me. To try and have the spirituality without religion, to try and know the shepherd without following the ways that the shepherd told you that you come to know him, is to have a romantic relationship with the shepherd, with God. Sometimes I feel it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I can, it's almost, think how to say this in the right way and in a careful way. So excuse me if I say it in a way that's not the right way, but it's almost to live it's almost like a hookup culture a little bit with God. Right? Religion is about having a real relationship with God. It's about having the benefits of a committed, stable, serious relationship with God. It's not sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm with this one, that one. No, it's about I have intimacy with God. I have what's called holiness, kedusha, which actually means separateness, because it means that my relationship with God is to the exclusion of all others. Because it's not just a whatever. It's something committed. It's something real. There's boundaries around it. And when a person has that, they have the ultimate medicine for this world. The ultimate medicine. Because what all the research in psychology shows is that when we're out there in the world, which involves so much evaluation, how well did I perform in something? How good am I at this? I'm trying to get this promotion. I'm trying to develop this relationship with somebody. I'm trying to find my person. I'm trying to get into this social group. I'm trying to acclimate to a new community. All these things. There's so much experience of self-evaluation and other people evaluating me. And my sense of self becomes so fragile and so flimsy. And what all the research shows is that if I have that solid base, that anchor, in which I know that I have a home base where I'm loved, where I'm known, where I'm cared about, then I can go through all the ups and downs, all the successes and failures of going out, venturing out into this challenging world around me, and I can be okay. Because I have the shepherd with me. But if I don't have that connection, that home base, then when I'm out there in that world trying to make it work, it's a long night. So why should we have a relationship with God? Because that's what a relationship with God gives us. In my view, this is just me speaking for myself. Many people can sit here and give you an entirely different perspective on why religion or God matters to them. This is just me. Yeah.
So, can you talk about the relationship or between like God and self-determination? Because if you pray for something and it happens, and it's because you prayed to God, then would it happen if you hadn't tried, or if you go out in the world and are social, that you've been more successful and you didn't think about God, how do you explain that? Or
Right. It's a big mystery.
yeah, sorry, it's like an elementary question.
No, I mean it's the ultimate question. Maybe in a sense you're right. Maybe in a sense it's elementary, but it's elementary in the sense that it's the ultimate, most sophisticated, complex question, and I don't know. It's a big mystery. I mean, there's so many facets to the question also, so it kind of depends on which aspect of what you're asking we focus in on.
Well, let's take Nico's. He said if something bad happens, it's okay, because there's a bigger kind of picture, somebody's thinking about it, and I guess I'm just curious. I mean, bad things happen consistently to some people.
Right.
Is it because they don't believe in God, or God is actually putting bad things in front of them all the time?
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, how do you
Yeah.
account for that?
Yeah. So again, I mean, these are ultimate questions to which I certainly don't have the answer. But Well, maybe, and the truth is, even within that question, there's so many different facets to the question. But maybe if I can speak to one or two of them, and you can guide me in a different direction if you want. But I think what you said is so profound about when a person experiences something that seems bad, to be able to know and feel that there's a purpose, that there's a being that is all knowing and all good and all powerful, that has directed this in this way on purpose for a reason. That is very powerful. But again, I'm speaking only for myself. For me, to be able to have a relationship with God means being able to say that and know that, but to also have space to be angry at God and say that didn't feel good. And why did I have to go through that? And maybe you had your reason on some level, but right now it feels awful. And that having a real relationship with God, if God is actually my intimate partner, is actually my friend, is actually my shepherd, is all of these things, is actually my father, etc., then I can tell him that. And I can tell him that in the most real and raw expression and terms. Because he can handle that. He's big enough to handle that. And I can hold both of those things at the same time. So there's ultimately, in the end, there's an unknown and there's a mystery. And as one great thinker once said, I wouldn't want to believe in a God that I could understand. That would mean he's as small as me. And that wouldn't be so valuable to me. So it's a mystery ultimately. But I think that there is space for being able to have that knowledge that can be helpful, and also to have a raw and real relationship. That we actually can express those emotions, that God, I know that you're out there, and I know, because the truth is, you know what the biggest affirmation to my belief in God is? If I'm angry at him. If I didn't believe in him, I wouldn't be angry at him. And if I didn't think he was involved in this, I wouldn't be angry at him. So if I'm angry at him, that means I think he exists, and it means I think that he's involved. So my anger is actually an affirmation of my belief and my relationship.
So what do you do with it?
Talk to him. Tell him about it. How angry you are at him. Maybe. Talk to others about it.
But that's not the only. There's certain times where it's a. I don't want to speak for you, but
No, of course. Yeah.
that's we talked about. We talked about Laura's leg and the blessedness every morning of the relationship of gratitude, and throughout a day you can feel a ton of these. It's really a wide range of emotion and connection.
One of my most powerful, I would say, spiritual moments in my life was a moment of sitting by myself late at night in my house when everyone was asleep, the lights were off, and just telling God in the plainest of terms how angry I was at him for something that happened to me in my life. And that was extremely therapeutic, let's say. Extremely cathartic. It was a huge release. And my relationship with God before that session, so to speak, and after that session is almost unrecognizable. The shift that took place in me from before doing that to after doing that, completely different. Yeah.
So I've been trying to think of what I wanted to ask you, because I'm like, now it has to be a good question. Your response is very good. I think that a lot of people who are not, let's say, Orthodox, primarily struggle with the concept of God, because if they were religious, if they believed in God a lot, they would probably respect all the rules more. And so you kind of use these terms like being and like a personable person. And I've also heard other kind of descriptions of God that I felt that were more tangible, like an energy that flows through the universe that kind of controls everything. And I kind of like that, because that kind of makes a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think this like PR issue of God being a person in the sky has always kind of thrown people a loop that I don't believe in that. That doesn't make any sense. What are some ways you would describe God in a tangible way to people who are trying to figure out whether or not he is there.
Mhm.
By the way, I agree with stuff that Michael said. Like, I've had things that I've maybe prayed for that actually happened. I was like, okay, that was weird, and now I'm maybe a little bit more open. And now I'm like worried if I like do something wrong. I'm like, ooh, that's gotta be careful there. So I have the feeling too, but it just certainly when I talk about God, it's like, what is the you've seen things, you're like, yeah, that was probably God. I have no other. I mean, I know we all have like, there's a lot of parts of this question, just like, how do you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So again, I can only speak for myself. My belief in God comes from sensing a very real and experiential sense of that energy that you're describing. That for me, when I pause, usually I'm going too fast, so I don't, unfortunately I miss it. But if I slow down and I take time and I pause to experience something in the physical world, from the simplest, most mundane thing to the biggest, most majestic thing, there always for me seems to be the sense that there's something here that is not contained by the physical object or entity that I'm experiencing. There's something here when I talk to a person, I look at a person, or I taste food, or I look at an object or anything. There's this sense. I can't prove it. I just know it. There's a sense that there's something here that feels present, but it's not just the physical object. And when I allow myself to be almost enchanted or taken, pulled by that sense of something, which feels like an energy, like you're describing, it feels like the presence of some energy, something that's here, right, kind of hovering over the physical world, but it's not the physical world itself, but it's connected to the physical world, but it's like mysteriously calling me. And when I allow myself to really connect to that, it seems to like pull me to follow it. And when you follow it, it becomes something even beyond where it started, bigger. And then when you follow that and you really meditate on that energy or that light, I connect with it very deeply as like a light and an energy. It goes further and it goes further and it goes further. It's almost like I think of it as like, like the magic trick with like the magician has like the string and he pulls it out, but then he starts like furiously pulling it because like it somehow never ends. When you follow that light, that energy, it's like somehow it's like it takes you further and further until you're in this space where it feels like there's something infinite that exists. And that infinite being that exists now turns into not just being an energy. Because if it's just an energy, if you take the just Eastern religion view of God, the Eastern world of God, I was talking more about the Western world as the philosophical, but if you take just the Eastern world view of God, where it's just an energy, now there's no volitional being. There's no personhood either. Because it's just an energy. But there is the sense that, like you were saying, there's a sense that there is someone answering me. An energy can't answer me. Right? And there's a sense that there's something that has intention or purpose in my being and the things that happen to me. An energy can't create purpose. But there's the sense that in that energy I'm perceiving, there's intention, there's purpose, there's relationship, there's something volitional, there's choice. Which means that when I follow that energy, I come into contact with a being that has volition, has intention, has purpose, has thoughts, so to speak, has feelings, so to speak, whatever exactly that means. And so now what that experience is, what I just described experientially, that is what Judaism describes as God. It's called in the mystical texts, Mimale kol almin umisovev kol almin. Mimale kol almin means a being that fills all worlds. It's the light of God, the presence of God, that became constricted enough to be present in our world. That, perhaps, is what the Eastern world has picked up on, this kind of energy presence of something spiritual. But the problem is that they kind of like cut it then from its source. And then there's something called Mesovev Kol Almin, which means that the godliness surrounds all worlds. And then there's something even more than that called the Ein Sof, the infinite, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which is even beyond that. And even that is actually just a constriction, because really God is unspeakable. You actually can't say anything to talk about God. And that's where the philosophical traditions got it right, that God is this thing beyond. But what Judaism shows is actually that they each got a different piece. And the problem was that they only got a piece, when the reality is that God is all of that, and more than that, and beyond that. Does that make sense? So again, I'm only that's for me.
I have like 10 follow-up questions, but I want to see if someone else needs to ask me a deep question. So.
Yeah, maybe we'll take one more and then take a break. I mean, I'm happy to keep going, but I don't know, whatever.
I want to take a break, but I want to get to the meditation.
Yeah, we're gonna do the
We have,
meditation.
really great energy.
We're gonna do the meditation. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so generally speaking, I really try to hold the belief that God does everything for a reason, and the reason is for my benefit. And when I hold that belief, it's very hard for me to be mad with God when something bad happens, because I'm trying to convince myself this is happening because it's for the best. So how can you hold space for both without feeling guilty that you're mad at God when you're trying to also convince yourself that it's for the best?
Sometimes my wife does things that I'm mad at her about, and I can also understand why she did them. Have you ever had that experience? I mean, with anyone in your life?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that you need to be mad at God in our conversation that we were having before. I'm just saying, or however that came about. I'm just saying that if you're feeling that way, then you're allowed to feel that way, and that you can express it, and that that's okay. That can be part of a relationship with God. But I'm not saying like you need to make yourself mad. If you're not mad, you're not mad. And if the belief is working and that's resonating with you in an embodied way, then it's resonating with you. My only concern is that sometimes what happens is that people use that belief to bypass the experience. And what then ends up happening is that they're kind of suppressing the actual experience that they're having, which means that now the relationship with God is going to become a purely intellectual one. Because intellectually, I can tell myself, well, God has a reason. But does that mean that I feel good when this bad thing happened to me just because I know that there was a reason for it, but I don't feel good? So we can deal with the intellectual level by the belief I have. What about the fact that like my heart's beating really fast, or like there's a pit in my stomach, or that I feel angry? What about that? So if I just suppress that and focus on the intellectual piece, I've actually just kind of compromised on the full wholesomeness of the relationship I can have with God. If I allow the anger in, now I can have a multifaceted relationship, because the emotional, physiological level of anger can express itself in relationship with God, not running away from God, but in relationship with God. Because again, anger actually brings me back to God. And intellectually, I can also be okay because I have that belief. Right? So it's not that a person needs to feel angry. It's just that I want to make space for that so that we don't feel the need to bypass and then compromise or limit the relationship we have with God. It's like at the Pesach Seder. There's a mitzvah, a ritual that we have to eat maror. Maror is the bitter herbs, right? The law is, I think this is very cool. The law is, according to most, that if you swallow the bitter herbs without tasting it, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. You didn't fulfill what you're supposed to do. You have to taste them. Meaning, if you experience something bitter in your life, you just tell yourself, just swallow it. It's for the best. Don't feel that it's bitter. No, you're supposed to feel the bitterness in it, because there's something in that bitterness that God wants you to get. There's something there for you. So does that kind of round it out a little bit? Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
Really quick. So you had said, compared it to like your wife did something, and you're like, I don't know where you came from there. But you can ask her, and you can find out and understand and be curious. I was also going to ask a question where, like, sometimes we see, once you start developing that lens of like trying to see that and trying to see the messages you're getting, like I'll experience things and I'm like, this same similar situation keeps happening, and I can't figure out what I'm supposed to get from this. But then, now I'm bringing up a different place. I'll stop myself. But basically, it's like, are we supposed to be meaning making? How do we know? because really what I was going to stop myself at is I can't make meaning of October 7th. That's not my department, and
Right.
I know that.
Right.
But to remind myself of that, but also try to figure out why I keep ending up in this same cycle, it's
Right.
really hard to find that line.
Yeah. So I think a few things. Number one, I think we are supposed to be meaning making, but always holding it lightly. Meaning, we have no idea, right? So, for example, as a metaphor to this, there is something called Ta'amei HaMitzvot, which means that we have commentaries that give us the reasons for the commandments. So, what's the reason why a person should do X, Y, or Z? Why did God command this? And we have a whole host of different reasons and suggestions, but none of them are actually why God commanded it in its fullness. We have no idea why. We have no idea why. We never know why. To think we could ever know why is to think that we have the wrong apparatus to fully understand God. We have a limited sense, and God it's a different. It would be like asking what color is in E minor. Like it's the wrong measurement, right? Or like how much does blue weigh? It's what they call philosophically a categorical error. So we can't ever know really why. It's beautiful that you've experienced things in your life where you prayed for it and it came through. But you also have no idea if that's why it came through. Right? But you can still think that. That's okay. We can have both. We have enough space to hold both. We have sophisticated enough minds that we can have the complexity of that. That we can make meaning and we can also hold the meaning lightly. And I guess maybe in line with that, or just another point is, and then there are things that we can't make meaning of. And we hold the mystery of it. We hold the unknown. And then there are things that we can't make meaning of for quite a while, and eventually later in life it becomes clear to us. And we've probably all had experiences like that, right? When I got rejected from U of C, I was devastated. Ate a lot of ice cream on the floor of my apartment. And now I look back, and it's one of the greatest blessings ever that I got rejected. And I have a clear path of where it went, but also at the same time, who knows? My whole made-up story as to why, might not even be true. Who knows? So it's all of it. It's complex, and that's the mystery, and that's the beauty of it. That's the intrigue of it. Uncertainty has a lot of advantages over certainty. Certainty is very boring. Uncertainty is very intriguing. Now, we don't want uncertainty to the point of instability, right? But there's a balance to it.
I would say that even in these horrible tragedies, there are silver linings. There's good that comes out of it. It's like, for one, it brought the Jewish people together. People who didn't really have a connection to Judaism or Israel. It really made them feel like they were Israeli and they needed to stand up and recognize who they were in this world and who they're a part of. And then the other part is Israel taking these steps to make sure that something like this never happens again. So it's just a matter of time before there's another intifada or an attack. And I think that Israel's kind of waking up and realizing, hey, we're vulnerable and we need to do something to prevent stuff like this happening. So there is good that comes out of even the worst.
Okay, should we take a little
Yeah,
break?
let's take a little break.
Okay.
Sir, thank you, Rabbi.